Hello. In this episode, we turn attention to the difficult problem of conflict in development. We're going to look at causes, consequences, and resolution, or cure for making this three C's for alliteration. But we're first going to look at the consequences to set the framework of how serious a problem that this is. The loss of life. Of course, war leads to loss of life. In societal conflicts, very often, much of the loss of life is among civilians, among non-combatants. And in particular, during the fighting itself, much of the immediate loss of life is of men who are involved with the fighting directly. But over a much longer period of time, deaths among women and children are usually greater than among men. Destruction of wealth as well. We see this in the literal shipping out of the country sometimes of machinery taken out and put on ships and taken elsewhere. Also, shipping wealth in the sense of, less literal sense, of financial transfers. Some 10% of wealth has been shipped out of countries in many such cases. Worsening hunger and poverty for multiple reasons. In the process of war, gross domestic product falls very substantially, and the longer that the conflicts continue, the more output falls. But also, one of the weapons of war that has been used is a deliberate attack on the food supply of the, quote, enemy, unquote, such as by deliberately slaughtering livestock, as an example. Loss of preventive and curative health functioning, as well as loss of schooling. When conflict proceeds, government resources are less, and what takes the brunt of those resources, well, as you can imagine, not the defense or military budgets, but in much greater preponderance, significant decreases in both the education and the health budgets, which of course lead to multiple problems in the short and the long run in terms of the key dimensions of successful economic development. With regard to schooling, children who leave school as a result of conflict typically do not get back later on all of the schooling that they lost, such as child soldiers, for example. A torn social fabric, tearing a social fabric of the so-called enemy is actually a part of a deliberate weapon of war. It's not just that as a result of conflict there is a torn social fabric, but for example, rape is used as a weapon of war with the deliberate purpose of undermining community and family cohesion. In sum, taken all together, this is why the problem of conflict in development has been called development in reverse. Looking at the picture over time, there's some good news, but some less good recent news. Here we have the period of time from the end of World War II in 1946 until 2017. It is data put together by the Center for Systemic Peace, which is known for their work in this area. On the y-axis, we have their systematic measure, which they define as summed warfare magnitude scores, and you can find the details on their website, which is referred to in the textbook. Here we have the total warfare incidents and magnitudes in the dark blue, which is a combination of societal warfare and interstate warfare, what we think of more traditionally as wars. We're going to focus here on societal warfare, which is the key problem, especially today, regarding conflict in developing countries. And we can see that the amount of conflict rose steadily in terms of societal warfare throughout from the end of World War II until about 1990, 1991. And it's no coincidence that this rise and subsequent decline falls right around the end of the Cold War. Many societal conflicts had been fueled in some ways by the Cold War, and support by the West and East for one side or the other. Subsequently, societal warfare fell quite dramatically, and it had been expected that this would kind of go the way of interstate war toward being very rare. There was a great deal of optimism by the turn of the century. However, since then, for the last couple of decades, there has been pretty much of a flattening out of this amount of warfare magnitude from the point of view of societal warfare, and arguably it has been ticking up in the last decade or so. So this is an area of grave and continued concern. One of the concerns is that while progress has continued to be made, at least until the last couple of years, on dramatically reducing poverty, this has been true largely in non-conflict areas. And so that while poverty has declined very dramatically, the fraction of the poor who live in conflict-afflicted states, fragile states, has doubled in the sense that there are now about 40% of the poor living in fragile conflict states compared to 20% about a quarter century ago. Then let's turn attention to some of the causes of armed conflict and the risk factors for conflict. There are a number of theories, but three are important in this context that we'll draw particular attention to. The first is this idea of horizontal inequalities introduced by Frances Stewart, a development economist. Her point is that while sometimes it's thought that inequality leads to violent conflict, and sometimes that a high degree of ethno-linguistic fractionalization can lead to high conflict. In point of fact, it's the confluence of the two. It's not that inequality leads to violent conflict necessarily, certainly, and not certainly that wide degree of ethnic fractionalization, different ethnic groups in a society leads to violent conflict. That's not the case. It's much more frequent when the two go together. That is to say, it's a particular ethnic group which is at the high end of this unequal distribution of wealth, and another ethnic group at the bottom, with these conflicts often initiated by those at the top, by the way. And so one needs to place particular attention to conditions where these horizontal inequalities exist and to ideally address the underlying inequalities soon before they can worsen into problems of armed conflict. Another area it has to do with natural resources for basic needs, especially in rural areas when these natural resources come under threat. Rising populations, movements of people through migration, deterioration with environmental problems, most recently and worseningly, of course, including impacts of climate change, the topic of chapter 10 in the text. Conflicts have resulted that have sometimes seemed fairly intractable. For example, conflict in the Sudan, in the Darfur, has partly to do with horizontal inequalities, different ethnic groups. It also has to do with impacts of climate change, or this was the findings of a major UN study of that problem. So when natural resources for basic needs are scarce, perhaps becoming scarcer on a relative basis, this is a source of violent conflict in a number of places in the world, such as northern Kenya, among others. Another is struggle to control exportable natural resources, most famously oil and diamonds, but many other resources as well, which can be more profitable and which also may constitute a large part of a given economy. The incentive then is very high for different potential elites, rival elites, to fight over the control over these resources, which are very profitable. This can lead to what Paul Collier has referred to as a natural resources trap. So these are some of the major causes of conflict. And strategies for addressing the problems of conflict, resolving it and preventing it, should take into account these underlying causal factors for conflict. We've already seen in chapter 10 some examples of how environmental deterioration can lead to greater conflict. Just worth mentioning this again in passing because it's thought this may be an emerging area of concern. Drawing down contaminating wells, migrating due to climate problems into areas settled by others, especially when these are of different ethnic groups, different languages spoken, and so on. Pastoralists moving into farmer territory and vice versa as they seek to respond to difficulties in climate change. Communities using neighbors' common property, whether that be potential fisheries or forests or grazing lands and so on, leading to conflict. And there's more details about this problem. Unfortunately, it looks like a growing problem in chapter 10. So then, stopping development in reverse, that is to say, resolving and prevention, cure if you want, for armed conflict. Well, first, once again, foundationally, our attention is returned to the importance of institutions. One of the most important things institutions can do is to prevent and solve conflicts. That, for example, is what a good judicial institution system can help to do. And so, inclusive, democratic institutions are important. Difficult to improve, but vital. We'll come back to this. Addressing commitment problems is really a vital area. With respect to commitment problems, this has to do with commitments that one party in an armed conflict makes to another party in the conflict arena. Typically, a commitment that a government would make to a, quote, rebel force, with both having claims to government authority, if you want. And so the question might be, well, why doesn't the government buy off the opposition? Because there's so much cost. Maybe that's what you want to do. Or maybe the opposition would like to end the fighting themselves. But what they are afraid of, quite reasonably, is that, well, they have a lot of authority now, the rebels do, because they're important and powerful enough for the government to want to make peace with them. The worry is that after peace has been achieved, arms have been laid down, and the country has moved toward peace, that suddenly the balance of power has changed. The government's position relative to that of the opposition becomes much stronger because they have more arms, because in general the situation is different. So how does the government typically resolve this? How do they commit themselves to the idea that peace, once agreed, will be followed, that the agreements that were expected will be followed? And there are many strategies for this. One is to combine and integrate the militaries of the opposing forces. That's one dimension of this. Another is to involve international actors, such as UN peacekeepers or other potentially important foreign donors. Global actors are in general very important, the UN being a key example. Some key countries that may play an external role. Regional actors, also very important. An Africa-wide approach has been adopted in recent years, which has been fairly effective in limiting conflict. National actors, not just the government, but we need multiple sectors, including civil society, to engage in conflict resolution. A focus on education is very important. For one thing, it leads to more opportunities, it can lower inequality, but also paying attention to what is taught. Sometimes education and the expansion of education has been, in a sense, hijacked to become a mechanism to spread certain ideologies that are violent in their nature. And so that the Education for All, EFA, initiative of UNESCO has also concentrated on this area as well, the quality and nature of the education as it's expanded. Another key area can be so-called community-driven economic development, in which the communities themselves have the central role in deciding on development priorities and seeing that they get implemented. This is a way in which various parties across the country get a greater stake in successful economic development, a stake in the outcomes. And so this is just a brief survey of some of the resolution or cure strategies. All of this is described in much more detail in Chapter 11 in the textbook. These are a summary of some of the main points. I would finally suggest that at the end of Chapter 14, there's a comparative case study looking at the cases of Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Honduras, which have had very different experiences with respect to preventing conflict and resolving them. Thanks.